Imagine a world leader's smartphone algorithm just experiencing like a total digital hallucination. And as a direct result, the price of the crude oil powering your commute spikes by $5 a barrel in a matter of hours.
Right, which sounds completely ridiculous, but I mean, that's not a plot from a sci-fi novel.
Yeah.
It is a documented diplomatic reality that literally happened this week.
Welcome to the Daily Deep Dive 3D initiative of UPSC with Saurabh Kaushik. If you are tuning in right now, you're someone who, well, you refuse to just skim the surface of the headlines. You know, you want to understand the hidden machinery behind the news.
Yeah, the geopolitical tectonic plates shifting beneath our feet.
Yeah.
And those really intricate economic forces that are shaping your future.
Exactly. And our job is to help you do exactly that without letting you get buried in the endless, overwhelming noise of the 24/7 news cycle. We take the raw data, the dense parliamentary reports, and synthesize them into, clear, actionable knowledge.
We map out those connections that just aren't obvious at first glance. We try to isolate the underlying mechanisms so you can see how, say, a microscopic chemical reaction in a lab directly influences UN strategies.
I mean, and we have an absolute mountain of interconnected intelligence today. We are going to rapidly fire through the 16 items on today's docket, pulling straight from the June 27, 2026 index. Ready for the 60-second overview?
Let's do it.
Okay, here we go. Number 1, the Iran and Strait of Hormuz shipping crisis is hitting a highly volatile boiling point. 2, a genuinely world-first nuclear heat hydrogen plant just went live in India. 3, crucial amendments to the National Food Security Act are fundamentally altering how millions receive their sustenance.
4, we are dissecting the nuances of the India-New Zealand Free Trade Agreement. 5, the UN Commission's incredibly heavy new evidentiary report on Gaza. 6, Prime Minister Modi's strategic diplomatic sweep through Seychelles.
7, the sudden regulatory ban on 16 irrational combination drugs you might actually have in your medicine cabinet right now. 8, the RBI's revised NBFC rules giving a massive reprieve to the Tata Sons conglomerate. 9, India's largest private gold mine finally breaking ground in Andhra Pradesh.
10, Asian markets tanking on tech woes. 11, how AI literally hallucinated and influenced Trump's Iran diplomacy in real time. 12, CBSE's major policy clarification on foreign languages. 13, mandatory post-transplant survival data rules demanding total transparency from hospitals.
14, the NCORV vision document laying out the war on drug control through 2029. 15, historical tributes analyzing the institutional power of Bankim Chandra and Shahuji Maharaj. And finally, 16, we're looking at green urea, sweeping health regulations, and standardized protocols for threatened species.
I mean, the scope of that index is just breathtaking. We're moving from high-stakes brinkmanship in international waters down to the molecular chemistry of energy generation and then all the way to household food security.
Our mission today is to take all of these seemingly disparate events and weave them into one cohesive understanding of the landscape you're navigating right now. Because, none of these things happen in a vacuum.
Right. They're all completely connected.
And to prove that point, we have to start by looking at how global stability, the very foundation that allows nations to feed their people, often hangs by the narrowest of geographic threads. Let's examine the escalating crisis in the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, but before we delve into the tactical movements of, naval assets and commercial vessels, I need to establish the analytical ground rules for this specific event.
Oh, absolutely. I'll make that explicitly clear to you listening right now. This deep dive takes no sides. We are not endorsing the geopolitical positions of the United States. We aren't taking a stance on the differing interpretations of UNCLS. And we are not validating or invalidating Iran's sovereign maritime claims.
Exactly.
Our sole function here is to impartially outline the geopolitical realities exactly as they have been reported in the raw source material.
Right. And the geopolitical reality as of June 25, 2026 is, well, it's highly precarious. The core incident revolves around a Singapore-flagged container ship named the Ever Lovely.
Which is operated by Taiwan's Evergreen Marine, right?
Yes. And while transiting near the Musandam Peninsula, which importantly is Omani territory, the vessel was struck. Now, fortunately, the crew sustained no casualties, but 2 U.S. officials independently confirmed to Reuters that Iranian forces fired upon the vessel.
Okay, let's unpack this. Why this specific ship? It wasn't American. It wasn't carrying military contraband.
No, it appears to be fundamentally about geography and routing compliance. The Ever Lovely was actively transiting a specific maritime route recommended by the UK MTO.
And that's the United Kingdom Maritime Trade Operations, basically the Royal Navy's primary security center out of Dubai, right?
Exactly. They act as the nerve center for commercial shipping threats, and they had specifically recommended a southern route that hugs the Omani territorial waters. They were deliberately trying to keep commercial shipping as far from the Iranian coast as the narrow geography allows.
But Iran obviously pushed back on that.
Massively. Iran's Deputy Foreign Minister, Kazim Garibabadi, issued a really critical statement on June 26. He basically declared that safe passage simply cannot be guaranteed under what he called ambiguous arrangements or parallel routes that bypass Iran.
Right, because Iran has established this entity they call the Persian Gulf Strait Authority. They're asserting that any ship, commercial or military, has to proactively coordinate with them to receive authorized passage.
Yes.
It's like someone setting up an unapproved toll booth on a public international highway, and when you use the public bypass, they fire at your tires.
That is a very accurate way to visualize it. Yeah. And the U.S. and 6 allied Gulf states view it through that exact same lens. They issued a joint statement categorically rejecting Iran's administrative claims, pointing directly to UN Celeste Part 3.
The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, the absolute bedrock of global maritime law.
Right. Specifically Part 3, which governs the Straits regime. It explicitly grants all ships the unhindered right of transit passage, meaning a vessel can move continuously without needing prior permission from bordering states as long as they aren't a threat.
So Iran's mandate is viewed as a direct violation of that international legal right. But, the most fascinating element here isn't just the legal debate, it's the diplomatic timing. We have to look at the Muscat Accord.
Yeah, the timing is the critical variable here. Just days prior to this kinetic incident, on June 14th, the Muscat Accord was finalized. This was a fragile but vital diplomatic breakthrough.
Where Iran agreed to ensure unhindered shipping, right?
Exactly. They committed to unhindered shipping through the strait for a designated 60-day Phase 2 nuclear negotiation window, supposed to last until August 13th. So firing on the Ever-Lovely on June 25 is a blatant, highly visible violation of an accord they signed less than 2 weeks prior.
So what is the strategic logic there? Why expend the political capital to sign a de-escalation accord only to authorize a strike on a civilian ship days later?
Well, we have to evaluate this through the framework of the two-level game theory of international relations.
Oh, I love this theory.
Yeah, it basically posits that national leaders are perpetually playing a diplomatic game on the international board while simultaneously playing a survival game on their domestic political board.
So they have two different audiences they're trying to appease.
Precisely. And the fact that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, fired on this vessel indicates one of two systemic realities. First, it could show a severe fragmentation of political control in Tehran. The civilian diplomats signed the accord, but the hardline military is acting independently to sabotage it.
Wow. And the second possibility?
The arguably more dangerous possibility is that this is a highly calculated, deliberate stress test by the unified Iranian state. They might be testing the boundaries of the Muscat Accord ahead of that August 13 deadline, just to see how much kinetic leverage they can exert before the West actually walks away from the table.
Just reminding the world, hey, we control the tap and we can turn it off whenever we want. And the fallout was instantaneous, right? I mean, the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, completely suspended its convoy operations.
They did. We are looking at a logistical disaster. The source documents note there are currently over 11,000 international seafarers stranded in holding patterns outside the strait.
Including what, an estimated 1,200 to 1,500 Indian nationals?
Yes, which forced the hand of India's Directorate General of Shipping.
Oh.
They issued a severe advisory telling Indian-flagged vessels to avoid the Hormuz transit entirely. India even deployed the INS Kochi, a heavily armed guided missile destroyer, into the northern Arabian Sea for contingency extraction.
But let's look at the market reaction, because honestly, it defies baseline logic. A commercial ship is fired upon in the world's most critical oil choke point, and global oil prices actually dropped by over 3%, settling near $89 a barrel. If the primary artery of energy is under attack, shouldn't the price just skyrocket?
You would think so, but the data paints a really complex picture of modern market psychology. Institutional traders are pricing in long-term friction, sure, but their algorithms broadly expect the June 14 Muscat Accord to hold in the short term.
So they see it as posturing, not a prelude to total closure.
Right. But that market optimism is balancing on a knife's edge. The U.S. Geological Survey recently estimated there are still roughly 80 active naval mines unaccounted for in those shipping lanes.
That is terrifying. Every captain is navigating a literally mined waterway. And if we look at India's specific exposure to this choke point, it's staggering. Over 40% of our total crude oil imports transit exclusively through the Strait of Hormuz.
And over 60% of our DAP fertilizer diammonium phosphate, which is critical for Indian agriculture, comes from Gulf ports relying on that exact same passage.
Exactly. This exposure perfectly illustrates that for India, energy independence isn't just an environmental goal anymore. It is a supreme, immediate national security imperative. Every barrel of oil we import through that strait is a geopolitical vulnerability.
Which perfectly brings us to our next subject. Because while diplomats are stuck over these vulnerable shipping lanes, Indian scientists in Tamil Nadu just inaugurated a facility that could alter how we power the domestic economy, entirely independent of foreign oil.
Yes. Let's talk about the Department of Atomic Energy's world-first nuclear heat hydrogen plant. Topic number 2.
Right. This technological milestone took place at the Indira Gandhi Center for Atomic Research IGCIR in Kalpakkam, Tamil Nadu. The chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission formally inaugurated it on June 26.
And the underlying technology here isn't just a minor improvement. It's a genuine indigenous breakthrough developed by BR in Mumbai. We constantly hear about color-coded hydrogen, green from solar, blue from gas with carbon capture, gray from unabated fossils. But this is specifically identified as pink hydrogen.
Yes, pink hydrogen utilizing a copper chlorine, or QCl, thermochemical cycle.
Okay, let's demystify this for the listener. How does a thermochemical cycle differ from, standard green hydrogen production?
Well, standard green hydrogen relies entirely on electrolysis. You build massive solar or wind farms, generate electricity, and pass that current through water. The electrical energy physically breaks the H2O chemical bonds, separating the hydrogen and oxygen.
It's an elegant concept, but it requires vast amounts of electricity.
Exactly. That is the friction point. A thermochemical cycle changes the primary energy input entirely. Instead of electricity, it uses intense, sustained thermal energy heat to drive closed-loop chemical reactions. In this specific QCl cycle, they use copper and chlorine compounds that interact with water vapor at extraordinarily high temperatures, specifically between 400 and 550 degrees Celsius.
Wow.
Through 4 or 5 chemical steps, the water splits, the hydrogen is extracted, and the copper and chlorine are completely recycled back to the beginning.
Okay, but I have to ask the obvious question. Why go through this incredibly complex, highly corrosive chemical dance involving copper and chlorine at 500 degrees? Why not just plug a water tank into a solar panel and use standard electrolysis?
The answer lies entirely in thermodynamic efficiency. The universe strictly penalizes you whenever you convert energy from one state to another. With solar electrolysis, you capture solar radiation, convert it to direct current, losing massive amounts of energy to heat and cell inefficiency.
Right, and then you run it through an inverter.
Exactly, and push it into an electrolyzer. Every single step bleeds potential energy. But a nuclear reactor doesn't fundamentally generate electricity. It generates raw, intense heat from the fission of atoms. By extracting that waste process heat directly from the core and piping it into the chemical cycle, you completely bypass the massive conversion losses of turning heat into electricity first.
Oh, that makes total sense. You're effectively cutting out the middleman. You harness the raw thermal power of the splitting atom and apply it directly to splitting the water molecule. But where is IGCR sourcing that continuous supply of 500-degree heat?
They are tapping into the FPTR, the Fast Breeder Test Reactor. It's a cornerstone of India's nuclear heritage, a sodium-cooled fast-spectrum research reactor operating reliably at Kalpakkam since 1985.
Stage 2 of Homi Bhabha's legendary 3-stage nuclear program.
Precisely. Bhabha's vision to utilize thorium by first breeding plutonium in fast reactors. The FBTR provided the operational data required to construct the massive 500-megawatt prototype fast breeder reactor, the PFBR, which is nearing final commissioning at that exact same site.
So they are proving that high-grade waste heat from these fast breeder reactors can be harvested to drive this cycle. That establishes a scalable pathway for staggering quantities of carbon-free pink hydrogen.
And that ties directly to the National Green Hydrogen Mission, which targets 5 million metric tons per annum by 2030. It's the only realistic way to decarbonize hard-to-abate sectors.
Like steel and shipping, because you can't run a massive blast furnace or a heavy cargo vessel on a lithium-ion battery pack. They need combustible, high-density fuels. They need hydrogen.
Right. By parallel tracking this nuclear pathway alongside solar and wind, India is structurally fortifying its industrial base for the next century.
And, while securing our energy future fortifies the nation from the top down, securing the population's most basic needs fortifies it from the bottom up. Which leads us to our next topic, deep systemic changes in the welfare state. Let's look at the profound new amendments to the National Food Security Act, the NFSA.
We are witnessing a monumental shift here in the political economy of India's social safety net. The central government has formally tabled extensive amendments to the NFSA of 2013. The headline shift targets the per capita entitlement for priority households.
Which has historically been 5 kilograms of food grains per person per month.
Right, but the new amendment radically increases that baseline to 7 kilograms per person per month.
An extra 2 kilos for every single individual every month. At a national scale, that volume is just staggering. But the policy isn't an open-ended increase. There's a highly specific mathematical break built into the legislation, the 35-kilogram household cap.
Yes. That cap fundamentally changes the distribution curve. While the individual allocation rises to 7 kilos, no single household, regardless of size, can receive more than a strict maximum of 35 kilograms per month.
It's like setting a maximum speed limit on a buffet line. A family of 5 hits the 35-kilogram sweet spot perfectly, 7 kilos times 5 people. But it prevents a massive household of 10 from taking double the resources, ensuring the state's buffer stocks don't drain instantly. It acts as an actuarial failsafe.
And it serves a crucial administrative purpose: standardization. It brings priority households into perfect volumetric alignment with the Antyodaya and Yojana, the AAY category, the poorest of the poor, whose entitlement has always been a flat 35 kilograms.
Yeah.
It creates elegant parity.
And a crucial piece of context for the listener, this grain isn't merely heavily subsidized anymore like it was in 2013. It is entirely free.
Right. The pricing mechanism changed permanently after COVID-19. The government rolled the emergency PMGKA free grain provision into the permanent NFSA structure in 2023. The old issue prices of 3 rupees for rice and 2 rupees for wheat are abolished.
So we're providing completely free food grains to 67% of the total Indian population. Over 80 crore people. The macroeconomic burden of that is immense. What does it actually cost to deliver an extra 2 kilos a month at that scale?
Well, the logistics translate to an additional 160 lakh tons, 16 million metric tons of grain procurement annually. Factoring in minimum support price, storage, and distribution at roughly 30 rupees per kilogram, this amendment injects an additional 48,000 crore rupees annually into the food subsidy bill.
48,000 crore rupees. Why pull the trigger on this massive fiscal expansion right now in the middle of 2026?
Policy analysis requires looking at both political realities and meteorological data. Politically, the nation is accelerating toward highly contested state assembly elections in massive battlegrounds like Bihar and Maharashtra. Aggressive welfarism is a proven electoral strategy.
And meteorologically.
The reality is grim. The IMD is forecasting severe agricultural stress driven by a severe deficit in the upcoming Kharif 2026 monsoon. The government is preemptively flooding the system with grain to build a social buffer against the inevitable food inflation.
It's important to remember this massive apparatus was forced into existence by relentless legal activism. The fundamental right to food was established through landmark jurisprudence.
Yeah, it traces back to the historic 2001 Supreme Court public interest litigation, PUCL versus Union of India. The court ruled the right to food was an integral component of Article 21, the right to life with dignity. The 2013 NFSA codified that, and this 2026 amendment is its most significant expansion.
Yet none of this legal theory matters if the grain cannot reach a migrant laborer who moves across state lines. The true genius of the modern NFSA is the ONORC, the One Nation, One Ration Card system.
Right. Aadhaar biometric authentication fundamentally solved the system's greatest flaw, geographical lock-in. Currently, over 96% of beneficiaries are Aadhaar linked. A migrant worker from rural Bihar can walk up to a biometric machine in Mumbai, authenticate their fingerprint, and instantly draw down their family's exact grain entitlement.
Digital portability gives the welfare state its modern resilience. But let's connect the dots back to the macroeconomy. Feeding 81 crore people for free requires generating immense domestic wealth. The state needs revenue, which means expanding our global economic footprint. That absolute necessity brings us to the complexities of the India-New Zealand Free Trade Agreement. Topic 4.
The INFTA represents a highly strategic victory. Substantive negotiations have just concluded. And while the current bilateral trade volume is a modest $1.8 billion, the structural wins for India are significant.
What specifically did we secure?
The Indian strategy focused on high-value sectors. The biggest victory is securing absolute zero-duty access for Indian pharmaceuticals entering New Zealand.
Which is massive, considering tariffs were between 5 and 15%.
Exactly. Plus, India negotiated a dedicated professional mobility chapter. New Zealand is now legally bound to provide streamlined visas and temporary movement rights for highly skilled Indian IT professionals and consultants.
Okay, we secured our high-tech and medical exports, but negotiations require concessions. What did New Zealand manage to extract?
They prioritized their own dominant sectors. They secured significant phased tariff reductions on education services, meaning priority student visas for Indians and formal recognition of New Zealand online degrees. They also got reductions on wine, kiwi food, and zero-duty access for raw wool exports.
Let me stop you there because anyone who tracks global trade knows New Zealand's economy is practically built on dairy. They are the world's absolute top dairy exporter. If we explicitly excluded butter, milk powder, and cheese to protect Indian farmers, how did we even get them to sign a free trade agreement?
It reveals a profound evolution in modern trade strategy. For Wellington, this FTA was never solely about flooding India with milk powder. It was about strategic economic diversification. They realized gaining a first-mover advantage into India's exploding middle class for higher education and tech services is vastly more valuable over the next 3 decades than fighting a losing battle over dairy tariffs.
They conceded the dairy fight to win the broader demographic war. We also have to look at the GI tags, right? Geographically indicated protections.
A very robust GI framework here. Over 150 distinct Indian GI products like Darjeeling tea get ironclad legal protection against counterfeiting in New Zealand. In exchange, New Zealand's Manuka honey receives formal GI recognition in India.
But zooming out geopolitically, this FTA is a masterclass in how India is rewriting its role in the Indo-Pacific trade architecture.
Well, absolutely. Look at India's recent trade pacts, the UAE, Australia, the UK, Israel, and now New Zealand. It is a highly calibrated, developed market-first strategy.
It's a stark pivot away from joining massive multilateral blocs like RCEP, where our domestic manufacturing would just get hollowed out by Chinese industrial dumping.
Right. We walked away from RCEP in 2019. But New Zealand, Australia, and the UK are members of the CPTPP. By aggressively signing bespoke bilateral deals with them, India is essentially building a network of custom backdoors into the CPTPP bloc, on our own terms, without having to submit to its more draconian labor or environmental standards.
It's incredibly pragmatic trade diplomacy. Now, FTAs show the optimistic, cooperative side of international law. But there is a much darker side when conflict breaks out. We have to turn to topic 5. The grave legal realities outlined in the UN Commission's latest report on Gaza.
Yes. And before we discuss the specific terminology and evidentiary standards, I must absolutely pause and emphatically reiterate our impartiality directive.
Agreed. We are not endorsing any geopolitical viewpoints, political positions, or legal judgments regarding the Israel-Gaza conflict. We are strictly analyzing the contents of the UN Kauai's latest report and the international legal frameworks involved, exactly as provided in our source materials.
Thank you. The source material states that on June 26, 2026, the UN Independent International Commission of Inquiry, the Kauai, released a comprehensive report. Their headline finding was that they found reasonable grounds to believe that Israel has demonstrated genocidal intent during its military operations in Gaza.
To comprehend the gravity of that, we have to look at Article 2 of the 1948 Genocide Convention. It requires 2 highly distinct elements, right?
Yes. The objective physical occurrence of genocidal acts, and crucially, the mens rea report, the specific mental intent to destroy a group. The physical reality of 45,000 casualties and systemic resource shortages documents the acts. But proving intent is the monumental legal hurdle.
Here's where it gets really interesting for international law. Intent is notoriously the hardest thing to prove in any court. How does an administrative body prove intent just from circumstantial evidence without, like, a smoking gun document?
The Commission argues intent can be definitively inferred from a constellation of state behaviors. They cite a massive volume of public statements by senior officials, loosened rules of engagement, the sheer scale of civilian casualties, and prolonged aid blockades. They argue the cumulative effect of these actions provides overwhelming circumstantial evidence of structural intent.
And the official Israeli response?
Total rejection. Israel labels the KLI as systematically biased and refuses to cooperate. Their legal defense rests entirely on Article 51 of the UN Charter, asserting their operations are legitimate self-defense following the October 7 attacks by Hamas.
We need to be precise here. The headlines scream genocide, but legally, this Kauai report is not a conviction.
Vital distinction. The Kauai is just a fact-finding body. Their reasonable ground finding is like a police dossier. It has zero power to sanction. For a binding conviction, the focus shifts to The Hague.
To the ICJ and the ICC.
Exactly. The ICJ deals with the responsibility of sovereign states. South Africa's ongoing case against Israel at the ICJ will almost certainly use this new Kauai report as a massive evidentiary exhibit. Parallel to that is the ICC. which targets individual human beings, like the arrest warrants issued for Netanyahu and Hamas leaders. The COI's findings on structural intent could heavily inform how the ICC prosecutor expands those individual cases.
So where does India position itself in this highly polarized crisis?
India is walking an incredibly complex diplomatic tightrope. New Delhi calls for dialogue and a two-state solution, but strictly avoids the term genocide. They have repeatedly abstained from one-sided UNGA resolutions. They must preserve deep defense ties with Israel while not alienating the Arab Gulf states, which provide our energy security.
Right. And that extreme volatility in the Middle East forces India to secure alternative strategic depths closer to home, which transitions perfectly into Topic 6. PM Modi's diplomatic sweep through the tiny island nation of Seychelles.
This visit is a vital expansion of the Saigar Doctrine's security and growth for all in the region. Seychelles is an archipelagic nation of just 96,000 people, but about 5% of their entire population are of direct Indian origin.
Dating back to 18th and 19th century indentured laborers and merchants, that creates an invaluable baseline of soft power. But geopolitically, why is PM Modi deploying the full weight of the state for such a tiny island?
Because Seychelles is tiny in landmass, but its exclusive economic zone is massive.
Seychelles is tiny, but geopolitically it acts as the master watchtower. It's the pivot point connecting the Arabian Sea trade lanes to the East African coast.
Exactly. HUMANIS for Seychelles monitors the Western approach to India. We give them a Dornier surveillance aircraft in 2013. Our Navy conducts joint patrols there against piracy and Chinese fishing fleets. And we have the highly strategic Assumption Island infrastructure project,
where India is financing a deep-water jetty and a military-grade airstrip.
Yes. It faced domestic pushback in Seychelles, but New Delhi views it as a critical staging hub for power projection. You have to evaluate it against China's string of pearls strategy, their ports in Sri Lanka, Maldives, Djibouti, Pakistan. India's engagement with Seychelles is the countermaneuver, the necklace of pearls.
Right, plugging the vulnerabilities in our defensive perimeter. It's all about protecting our external borders and maritime health, which brings us to protecting the internal biological health of our citizens. Topic 7. The sudden regulatory ban on 16 combination drugs.
We are looking at fixed-dose combinations, or FDCs. It's when a manufacturer compresses two or more distinct chemical ingredients into a single pill. Now, many FDCs are highly rational, like combining 3 blood pressure medications to improve patient compliance. But the CDSCO, India's apex drug regulator, just invoked emergency powers to completely ban 16 specific, newly developed FDCs because they were clinically deemed irrational.
And when you read the breakdown, irrational feels like an understatement. They banned an FDC that combined a potent antibiotic directly with an antacid in the same pill. The antacid neutralizes stomach acid, but the antibiotic actually requires an acidic stomach to be absorbed. The pill literally fights its own absorption.
It's absurd. They also banned vitamin B12 mixed with aloe vera cream, claiming enhanced absorption with zero clinical evidence, and various obscure chemical combos marketed for baseless skin lightening.
I have to ask a cynical but necessary question. If these drugs objectively don't work better together and sometimes even cancel each other out, why do pharma companies spend millions developing and marketing them? Is it just a loophole to repatent off-patent drugs and hike prices?
You've hit the nail on the head. It is driven almost entirely by commercial strategy and patent maneuvering. They combine 2 cheap generic drugs, branded as a novel therapy, and incentivize doctors to prescribe the expensive combination. But the real danger here is antimicrobial resistance AMR.
The silent pandemic?
Exactly. Many banned FDCs contain subtherapeutic doses of antibiotics mixed with cold medicines. A dose too low to kill the infection just exposes the surviving bacteria, allowing them to genetically adapt and become superbugs. By permitting these, India was accelerating its own AMR crisis.
Not to mention the global reputation risk to our massive pharma export industry if the US FDA or WHO sees us allowing dangerous chemistry. Regulatory crackdowns aren't just limited to the health sector, though. Financial regulators are tightening the screws on corporate giants to prevent systemic economic sickness. Let's shift to topic 8. Tata Sons and the RDI's revised upper layer NBFC rules.
To comprehend this, we have to look back to the 2018 and 2019 collapses of massive non-banking financial companies like IL&FS and DHFL. Their defaults froze credit markets and devastated the MSME sector.
Because NBFCs provide so much operational credit to small businesses.
Right. So in 2021, the RBI introduced the scale-based regulation, the SBR framework. It categorized NBFCs into 4 layers: base, middle, upper, and top. Any entity designated as an upper layer NBFC faces incredibly stringent scrutiny.
And buried in those rules was a mandate that any upper-layer NBFC must IPO and list publicly within 3 years. The RBI designated Tata Sons as upper layer in 2022, meaning a hard deadline to go public by September 2025.
Which was a massive crisis for the Tata Group. Tata Sons isn't a retail lending NBFC, it's a core investment company, a CIC. It serves exclusively as the central holding company for the entire $300 billion conglomerate. It holds the equity stakes in already listed giants like TCS and Tata Motors. Plus, 66% of Tata Sons is held by the philanthropic Tata Trusts. Forcing them to IPO would subject them to relentless market pressures and forced disclosure of complex, century-old cross-holdings.
So what does this all mean? The RBI issued a targeted revision in 2026.
They did. The 2026 revision clarified that the mandatory listing applies strictly to NBFCs primarily engaged in active market-facing investment and lending, meaning pure holding companies whose only function is holding shares of already listed subsidiaries will likely be exempted.
It's like the RBI built a massive shark cage to protect the market from dangerous predators, but accidentally locked a giant harmless whale inside. This new revision just lets the whale out.
That is exactly what happened. It restores the original intent of the SBR, which was to discipline high-risk systemic lenders, not needlessly dismantle legacy holding companies.
Which transitions us from abstract billions locked in holding companies to physical billions being pulled straight out of the earth in Andhra Pradesh. Topic 9. The Genocidal gold mine.
The Genocidal Greenfield gold mining project in the Kurnool district, developed by Deccan Gold Mines Ltd., is slated to become India's largest private sector gold-producing asset.
The scale is impressive. 27 tons of proven reserves, Rs 700 crore Phase 1 investment, aiming for 1.5 to 2 tons annually.
And you have to understand the geology. It sits on the Darwar Craton, an ancient stable block of crust. It's the exact same geological province that hosted the legendary Kolar gold fields. The gold is definitively down there.
But we practically mine zero domestic gold right now. We have the world's largest household accumulation of gold, 25,000 tons sitting in safes and jewelry boxes, yet we produce practically zero from our own ground. We import 90% of our need, draining $45 billion a year from foreign exchange. This mine feels like a massive psychological shift for the Indian economy.
It absolutely is. For decades, private capital was locked out of exploration by the archaic 1957 MMDR Act. The 2015 and 2021 amendments demolished those monopolies, paving the way for private commercial mining through transparent auctions. Genocidal is the first major fruit of those changes.
But while gold is the ultimate stable physical asset, modern wealth is incredibly volatile, driven by things like AI and tech. Which brings us to a brief mention of Asian markets tanking and a deeper look at how AI is destabilizing diplomacy. Let's combine topics 10 and 11.
Where the index briefly noted Asian markets tanking due to Apple price hikes and AI chip shortages at foundries like TSMC, wiping out billions in market cap. But the more terrifying story is the software running on those chips.
Yes, the intersection of technology and diplomacy. And I must expressly state, we are objectively analyzing this intersection, not taking a stance on U.S. domestic politics or endorsing the political figures mentioned.
Agreed. The Hindu conducted a meticulous analysis of Donald Trump's posts on Truth Social regarding Iran from February to June 2026. The volatility is staggering. The posts zigzagged from threatening to completely obliterate the regime to praising the Muscat Accord, back to threatening bombing after the ever-lovely incident.
Erratic social media is nothing new, but the critical revelation was that investigative journalists traced these volatile posts directly back to AI-generated intelligence briefing summaries.
Exactly. Political staffers, lacking time, fed raw intelligence into commercial large language models to generate executive summaries for the principal. The fatal flaw is AI hallucination. The algorithms systematically hallucinated factual errors regarding Iran's military deployments and mistranslated Farsi diplomatic posturing. Those errors formed the direct factual basis of aggressive public communications.
And returning to the two-level game we discussed earlier, social media puts it in reverse. Trump's erratic posts dictated market prices, with Brent crude violently fluctuating $3 to $5 a barrel based on a hallucinated AI summary. And it handed Iranian hardliners exactly the domestic political ammunition they needed to justify kinetic actions.
It collapses the barrier between mere communication and hard state policy.
If an AI hallucinates a fact about a foreign military and a world leader posts it, and the oil market crashes because of it, Are we now in an era where algorithms are accidentally writing foreign policy? That is chilling. And if AI and language can cause international crises, how we teach our youth to communicate globally has never been more vital. Let's look at topic 12, CBSE foreign languages.
The CBSE was forced to issue a highly critical clarification. They officially stated that students currently in classes 7 through 9 who chose to study 2 foreign languages simultaneously, say French and German, can legally keep studying them for the current academic year.
Which sounds minor, but it stems from severe confusion over the National Education Policy, the NEP 2020.
The NEP's 3-language formula heavily prioritizes Indian classical and regional languages to decolonize the curriculum, which is a valid ideological goal. But it didn't clearly outline how students could choose 2 foreign languages as their second and third options. School administrators panicked, assuming they had to immediately terminate foreign language programs to comply.
And there are over 6 lakh students studying French alone, plus the unique structural issues in places like Nagaland, where English is the state language, but indigenous tribal languages are the mother tongues.
The government is trying to balance preserving India's rich linguistic heritage with the pragmatic desire of parents to prepare kids for a globalized workforce. This clarification hits pause, allowing the current cohort to finish their studies without disruption while the finalized guidelines are drafted.
Imagine being a 13-year-old halfway through learning French and Japanese, and suddenly a policy document threatens to wipe out your progress. This CBSE clarification is a massive sigh of relief for thousands of students and parents.
It highlights that massive policy transitions require absolute transparent communication to ease public anxiety.
And just as education policy requires transparent communication, the healthcare sector is realizing transparency is a matter of life and death. Topic 13. Mandatory post-transplant data for hospitals.
The Ministry of Health directed all 256 registered organ transplant hospitals to publicly post highly granular survival data on their websites and the centralized NATO portal. They have to publish 1, 3, and 5-year graft survival rates, absolute transplant volumes, and surgical complication rates.
NATO historically was just a logistical waitlist tool, right? Connecting organs to patients.
Yes, but India recently crossed the milestone of 5 lakh organ donation pledges. As organ donation increases, the system has to evolve. Publishing this clinical data shifts NATO into a quality transparency platform, aligning India with global best practices like the US UNOS and UK NHS. Patients will finally have empirical data to compare hospitals.
It's great for patients, but could this backfire? If hospitals are terrified of their public survival score dropping, won't they just refuse to operate on the sickest, highest-risk patients? Won't they cherry-pick the easy cases?
That is the absolute classic unintended consequence, universally called risk aversion. The only regulatory safeguard is highly sophisticated risk adjustment algorithms. Mature systems don't publish raw data, they adjust it based on patient severity. If a surgeon takes a high-risk patient, the model expects a lower outcome, so the hospital isn't penalized. The Ministry of Health will absolutely have to implement these risk adjustment methodologies.
While the medical system fights to preserve life organ by organ, the national security apparatus is fighting to preserve lives against a totally different chemical threat. Let's pivot to internal security. Topic 14, the new NCORD vision document on drug control.
Home Minister Amit Shah chaired the 10th apex-level NCORD meeting, unveiling the vision document for 2026-2029. The threat matrix is terrifying. Last year saw over Rs 21,000 crore worth of illicit narcotics seized. They're tracking a 40% spike in synthetic drugs like meth.
And the dark web sales are hitting 15% of total trafficking operations.
Right. So the document have 5 pillars. Supply disruption, demand reduction through the Nasha Mukh Bharat campaign targeting youth, technology deployment like AI financial pattern recognition, capacity building to train 50,000 officers, and international cooperation treaties.
And we map out India's geographical vulnerability here. We are violently sandwiched between the Golden Crescent to the northwest and the Golden Triangle to the northeast.
Exactly. And the foundational NDPS Act of 1985 is fundamentally struggling to adapt to prosecuting AI-driven, cryptocurrency-funded cartel networks.
We always picture drug smuggling as people sneaking across physical borders in the dead of night, but this report shows the front line is now the dark web and Telegram. It's a dual-front war, geographical and digital.
And combating this modern societal decay requires the kind of foundational moral and social strength championed by India's historical reformers.
Yes, which leads to topic 15, historical tributes to Bankim Chandra and Shahuji Maharaj.
PM Modi paid tribute to Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay on his Jayanti, He was a deputy collector, but more importantly, the father of the Bengal Renaissance and author of the 1882 novel Anandamath, which gave India Vande Mataram. He used Bengali prose as a political tool for national awakening.
While Rajarshi Shahuji Maharaj of Kolhapur used sheer institutional power.
Exactly. In 1902, Shahuji Maharaj implemented a revolutionary 50% reservation for backward classes in his state administration. He patronized Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and legally abolished the Devadasi system.
Incredible to think that Shahuji Maharaj instituted affirmative action in 1902, decades before our Constitution was even written. These aren't just figures in a textbook. They actively engineered the social DNA of modern India.
Surely.
And honoring the legacy of past nation builders means taking concrete, modern steps to protect the environment and economy they left behind. Let's rapid-fire topic 16. Green urea, John Vishwa's health reforms, and NBA threatened species SOPs.
It's the modern governance triad: sustainability, economic pragmatism, and ecological preservation. First, the roadmap to replace natural gas with green hydrogen in urea production.
Tying directly back to our hydrogen discussion in topic 2.
Then the Jan Vishwa's reforms, systematically decriminalizing minor technical violations in pharma and food safety to massively boost ease of doing business. And finally, the National Biodiversity Authority issuing standard operating procedures for states to identify and protect threatened species to meet the Kunming-Montreal 30 by 30 targets.
Notice how we started this entire deep dive talking about nuclear hydrogen in Kalpakkam, and we end it talking about using green hydrogen to make urea for our farmers. It's all an interconnected web.
It perfectly illustrates how energy generation dictates agricultural production, which dictates national stability.
We have covered an incredible breadth of ground today, from the volatile Strait of Hormuz to the depths of a gold mine in Andhra Pradesh, navigating international law, public health, and trade negotiations. Thank you for sticking with us through the immense complexities of the June 27 Digest.
Before we go, I want to leave you with a final, lingering question. Today we looked at AI actively writing diplomacy, and the dark web actively fueling drug trades across borders. As emerging technology rapidly outpaces our traditional borders and century-old legal frameworks, will the very concept of a sovereign nation look completely different or even unrecognizable to the next generation of students currently agonizing over their CBSE language choices?
That is exactly the kind of question we want you exploring on your own. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the established narratives, keep aggressively connecting the dots, and most importantly, stay deeply, relentlessly curious about the world around you. We will see you next time.